A black woman, dressed in the simple functional attire of a wedding planner, moved with a quiet efficiency through the bustling pre-ceremony excitement. Her movements were precise, her voice a low and calming hum, as she guided guests to their seats and gave last-minute instructions to the staff. She was a ghost in the machine, ensuring the grand spectacle went off without a hitch. But in the opulent hall, shimmering with silks and floral arrangements, one person saw her as a stain on the perfect picture. The bride, Ashley, resplendent in white, spotted the planner near the grand aisle. A sneer twisted her perfectly painted lips. In front of everyone, the arrogant bride stopped, her voice sharp and loud, cutting through the murmurs of the guests. She humiliated the planner, mocking her simple clothes and accusing her of ruining the pristine aesthetic of her wedding photos. With a flick of her wrist, she ordered the woman out of the aisle, her voice dripping with disdain. What no one in that room knew was that this planner was not just an employee. She was not just a helper. She was the groom's mother. And she was a multi-millionaire CEO who secretly owned the very resort where this wedding was taking place. The bride had just kicked out the silent giant who held her entire future in the palm of her hand. When her true identity was finally revealed, jaws would drop. The bride's face would turn a ghastly shade of pale, and the groom would make a shocking announcement, a single sentence that would silence the entire crowd and bring the lavish affair to a crashing, dramatic halt. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. And if this story is already hitting home, make sure you hit that like button. The air in the grand ballroom of the Serenity Shores Resort was thick with the scent of lilies and anticipation. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden glow on the rows of elegantly dressed guests. Everything was perfect, a meticulously crafted fantasy of love and luxury. At the center of this orchestration was Marion Carter, a woman whose calm demeanor was the anchor in the storm of pre-wedding jitters. She wore a simple dark pantsuit. Her hair was tied back in a neat bun, and a discreet earpiece was her only accessory. To the casual observer, she was the wedding planner, an efficient professional making sure every candle was lit and every ribbon was straight. She adjusted a floral arrangement, her hands moving with a practiced grace. She gave a reassuring nod to the string quartet who were tuning their instruments. Her presence was meant to be invisible, a subtle force ensuring the bride's grand entrance was flawless. But invisibility was not something the bride, Ashley Monroe, was willing to grant. Ashley stood at the back of the ballroom, a vision in white lace and diamonds, her face a mask of bridal perfection. But as her eyes scanned the scene, they narrowed, fixing on Marion, who was doing a final check near the entrance to the aisle. A frown marred Ashley's brow. She beckoned over one of her bridesmaids, her voice a harsh whisper. "Who is that woman?" "Standing right there in the front. Her drab outfit is going to be in all of my pictures." The bridesmaid glanced over, confused. "I think that's the planner, the one who organized everything." Ashley's eyes flashed with indignation. The idea that a mere staff member would be so close to her moment of glory was an intolerable offense. She didn't care that Marion was the reason everything looked so perfect. All she saw was an obstacle, a blemish on her canvas. With a huff, she glided forward, her expensive dress whispering across the marble floor. The guests, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, turned their heads. The murmuring died down, replaced by a tense silence. Marion looked up from her checklist, a polite smile on her face, ready to assist with whatever last-minute need the bride might have. She opened her mouth to speak, but Ashley cut her off. "You!" Ashley said, her voice loud enough for the first few rows of guests to hear clearly. "What do you think you're doing?" Marion's smile faltered slightly, but her composure remained. "I'm just ensuring the path is clear for your entrance, miss." "Monroe, everything is ready." Ashley let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. "Ready? It won't be ready until you get out of the way. Look at you." She gestured dismissively at Marion's simple suit. "You look like you should be serving drinks, not standing at the front of my wedding. You are ruining my perfect photos." The words hung in the air, sharp and cruel. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. People exchanged shocked and uncomfortable glances. This was not the joyous prelude to a wedding they had expected. Marian's face remained a mask of professional calm, but a flicker of something unreadable passed through her eyes. It was a look of profound disappointment, but also of quiet confirmation, as if a theory she had been testing had just been proven correct. "I apologize if my presence is disruptive," Marian said, her voice even and steady. "I will move." But Ashley was not finished. She seemed to relish the public spectacle, the exertion of her power over someone she deemed insignificant. "Move? You should have known better in the first place. This is a high-class event, not a staff meeting. Now step aside. The help shouldn't be seen." She then delivered the final, most cutting blow, her voice dripping with scorn. "Go on! Get out of my sight! The maid doesn't belong in the family pictures." The word maid echoed in the silent hall. It was a deliberate, calculated insult, designed to strip Marian of her dignity in front of hundreds of people. The guests were now openly staring, their faces a mixture of pity for the planner and disgust for the bride. For a long moment, Marian simply looked at Ashley, her gaze steady and unwavering. She didn't flinch. She didn't argue. With a quiet dignity that seemed to radiate from her, she simply nodded once. "Of course, Ms. Monroe," she said softly. She then turned and walked away from the aisle, her back straight, her head held high. She moved to the side of the room, blending into the shadows near the catering staff, her expression unreadable. The room simmered with an unspoken tension. The bride had gotten her way, the aisle was clear of the help, but the beautiful fantasy had been fractured. A shadow of ugliness had fallen over the perfect day, and everyone had seen it. Standing at the altar, waiting for his bride, Daniel Carter saw everything. From his vantage point, he had a clear view of the entrance, and he had watched the entire horrifying exchange unfold. A wave of cold fury washed over him, so intense it made his vision blur for a second. He saw Ashley, his beautiful, radiant Ashley, transform into someone ugly and cruel. He saw her point, her sneer, her dismissive wave, and he saw the target of her scorn, a woman in a simple suit, a woman whose quiet strength had been the bedrock of his entire life, his mother. Every instinct screamed at him to stop the ceremony, to walk down that aisle and confront Ashley right then and there. His hands, hidden by his sides, clenched into tight fists, his knuckles turning white. He could feel the muscle in his jaw jumping as he ground his teeth together. How could she? How could she speak to anyone that way, let alone to his mother? He had told Ashley that his mother was a private person who preferred to stay in the background. He had explained that she wanted to help with the wedding in a hands-on way, to be involved without being the center of attention. He had framed it as a charming quirk, the humble nature of a woman who wasn't impressed by flashy displays. Ashley had smiled and nodded, seemingly accepting it. She had met Marian briefly on a few occasions, always in casual settings where Marian was dressed down. Ashley had been polite, if a little dismissive, treating her as one might treat a distant, unimportant relative. Daniel had attributed it to wedding stress, to Ashley's focus on her own family and friends. He had made excuses. He had been blind. Now, watching his mother retreat into the shadows, her dignity a silent rebuke to Ashley's public tirade, the excuses evaporated. He saw the truth with sickening clarity. Ashley hadn't seen a humble woman. She had seen a servant. She had judged Marian by her simple clothes and her quiet demeanor and found her lacking. The contrast between the two women was staggering. Ashley, adorned in thousands of dollars of silk and diamonds, looked small and petty. Her beauty was a fragile shell, and the cracks were showing, revealing the poison underneath. Marian, in her plain black suit, radiated a power and grace that no dress could bestow. She didn't fight back. She didn't raise her voice. She absorbed the insult with a smile, stillness that was more powerful than any angry retort. Her calm was not weakness. It was a fortress. Daniel's eyes flickered to the guests. He saw their faces, the shock, the pity, the second-hand embarrassment. They were all witnesses. They had all seen the true character of the woman he was about to marry. A part of him, the part that loved the charming, funny woman Ashley had been when they first met, wanted to believe it was a mistake, a moment of bridal panic. But he knew better. He had seen glimpses of this arrogance before, the way she spoke to waiters, the impatient sighs she gave cashiers, the condescending tone she used with anyone she considered beneath her. He had ignored it, brushed it aside. He couldn't ignore it anymore. The string quartet began to play the bridal march, the familiar, joyous notes sounding like a funeral dirge in his ears. Ashley turned, her face once again composed into a radiant smile, as if nothing had happened. She began her walk down the aisle, a vision of bridal perfection. But Daniel no longer saw a bride. He saw a stranger. He knew he should stop it. He knew he should halt the music, tell everyone to go home and end this charade right now. But he hesitated. He looked to the side of the room and met his mother's eyes. She gave him the slightest of nods, a look that said, "Not yet. Be patient. Let this play out." He trusted that look. He trusted his mother's wisdom more than anything in the world. So, with a heart made of lead and a rage simmering just beneath the surface, he took a deep breath. He unclenched his fists. He forced a mask of calm onto his own face, and waited as the woman who had just humiliated his mother walked toward him, ready to become his wife. The ceremony would proceed, but Daniel knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the wedding was already over. To understand the quiet power radiating from Marion Carter, one would have to travel far from the sun-drenched ballroom of the Serenity Shores Resort. One would have to go to the heart of the city, to a towering skyscraper of glass and steel that bore the name Carter Enterprises in discreet, elegant letters. There, on the top floor, in a sprawling corner office with a panoramic view of the skyline, was where Marion truly lived. In that world, she did not wear a simple planner's suit. She wore bespoke jackets and commanded a room with the soft-spoken authority that came from building an empire from the ground up. This was the real Marion Carter, founder and CEO of Carter Enterprises, one of the most successful luxury hotel and resort chains in the country. The Serenity Shores Resort, the very venue where Ashley was currently sneering at the staff, wasn't just a place Marion had booked. It was a property she owned. Every chair, every lily, every polished piece of silverware belonged to her. The staff she was quietly directing were not just contractors. They were her employees, part of a company she had nurtured for over 30 years. Marion's story was one of relentless determination. She had started with a single, struggling motel inherited from her parents. With a keen business mind and an unwavering belief in treating every guest and every employee with dignity, she had transformed it. She bought another, then another. She had a gift for seeing the potential in forgotten properties, for turning rundown establishments into havens of luxury and comfort. She built her brand, not on flashy advertising, but on a reputation for impeccable service and genuine hospitality. Carter Enterprises became the gold standard in the industry. But Marion never forgot where she came from. She had scrubbed floors and changed sheets in that first motel. She had worked as a receptionist, a bookkeeper, and a maintenance person. She knew every single job that made a hotel run, and she respected the people who did them. She was a millionaire many times over, a titan of her industry. But she had never lost the common touch. Her humility was genuine, born from a life of hard work. When Daniel had announced his engagement to Ashley, Marion had been cautiously optimistic. Daniel was her only son, the center of her world. She had raised him on her own, instilling in him the values of kindness, respect, and hard work. He had chosen to become a teacher, a path that made her immensely proud. As it showed, he had not been corrupted by the immense wealth that surrounded him. He had his own life, his own career, and he was not defined by his mother's fortune. She had wanted to see what kind of woman he had chosen to share that life with. And so she devised a test. It was a simple, quiet experiment. She told Daniel she wanted to be involved in the wedding in a practical way, to help as the on-site coordinator. She presented it as a way to feel connected to the process, a mother's desire to be useful. Daniel, knowing his mother's down-to-earth nature, had readily agreed. Ashley, when she was told, had barely registered the information. The groom's mother was just another name on a long list of people, and the fact that she was helping out only solidified in Ashley's mind that the Carters were comfortable but certainly not in her league. Ashley was obsessed with status, with the appearance of wealth. She had often spoken about marrying into a family with good standing and old money. She believed Daniel's family was respectable, but she had no idea of the true scale of their success. Marion had deliberately kept it that way. She had met Ashley in simple clothes, at a modest cafe, never revealing the vastness of her resources. Now, standing in the shadows of her own resort, Marion felt a deep, profound sadness. Her test had yielded its results, and they were more disappointing than she could have imagined. She wasn't angry about the insult. Insults from someone like Ashley were meaningless. She was heartbroken for her son. He had fallen for a facade, a beautiful woman with an empty heart. The humiliation at the aisle was not just an attack on her, it was a revelation of Ashley's true character. And Marion had seen everything she needed to see. The woman in the planner's suit was an illusion, a costume she had worn to see the truth. Soon the costume would come off, and the CEO of Carter Enterprises would have a few decisions to make. The reason for Marion's elaborate charade was rooted in a simple, unshakable belief she had held her entire life. A person's true character is not revealed when they are speaking to their superiors. It is not on display when they are trying to impress their peers. It is found in the quiet, unguarded moments when they interact with people they believe hold no power over them. It's in the way they speak to a janitor, the tone they use with a waitress, the patience they show a hotel clerk. Those were the moments that told the real story. Marion had built her entire business on this philosophy. She hired and promoted her staff based not just on their skills, but on their integrity and their capacity for kindness. She would often walk through her hotels incognito, dressed as a maintenance worker or a kitchen hand, just to observe. She would listen to the way her managers spoke to the housekeeping staff. She would watch how the front desk clerks handled a frustrated guest. It was her secret weapon, the moral compass that guided her empire. She believed that arrogance was a poison, a weakness that could rot a company from the inside out. A person who was cruel to those they perceived as beneath them could not be trusted with responsibility. They lacked empathy, the most crucial ingredient for leadership. When her son, the most precious person in her life, decided to get married, she knew she had to apply the same test. Ashley was charming, beautiful, and intelligent. On the surface, she was a perfect match for Daniel. But Marion had detected a faint, discordant note in her personality during their brief meetings. It was in the subtle way Ashley's eyes would scan a room, assessing everyone's worth based on their clothes and their jewelry. It was in the slightly condescending way she had once spoken about a public school where Daniel had considered working. They were small things, tiny cracks in a polished veneer, but Marion had seen them. So she created the role of the humble wedding planner. It was the perfect disguise. As the planner, she would be in a position of service. She would be taking orders, facilitating Ashley's vision. It would give her an unfiltered view of the real Ashley, the one who wasn't trying to impress the wealthy mother-in-law she didn't know existed. She wanted to be wrong. She had prayed that her suspicions were just the overprotective worries of a mother. She had hoped to see Ashley treat the planner with respect and gratitude. She had hoped to discover a woman who was kind and gracious to everyone, regardless of their station. That hope had died at the entrance to the aisle. Ashley's words, "made," the help, were not just a momentary lapse in judgment. They were a window into her soul. They revealed a deep-seated belief in a hierarchy of human worth, a worldview where people were either useful tools for her ambition or insignificant obstacles to be brushed aside. The audience in the ballroom, the wedding guests, now shared a piece of Marion's secret knowledge. They had seen Ashley's cruelty firsthand. They had witnessed her public humiliation of a woman who was only trying to help. They didn't know the full story yet. They didn't know Marion was a millionaire CEO or the groom's mother, but they knew they had seen something ugly and wrong. They were now part of the jury, silent witnesses to a trial of character. And Marion, the secret judge, was preparing to deliver her verdict. The wedding ceremony was proceeding, a hollow pantomime of love and commitment. But for Marion, the real event had yet to begin. She stood quietly in the background, her mind already shifting from mother of the groom to CEO. The trap had been set. The bait had been taken. Now all she had to do was wait for the right moment to let it snap shut. Among the catering staff, a young woman named Lena Brooks moved with a quiet efficiency that mirrored Marion's own. She was refilling water glasses and ensuring bread baskets were full, her face a mask of professional neutrality. But behind her calm exterior, her mind was racing, and her heart was pounding with a furious indignation. Lena was a university student working at the resort part-time to pay for her tuition. She was studying business, and ironically, she had just finished a course on corporate ethics where Carter Enterprises had been used as a case study for its exemplary treatment of employees. She revered the company's mysterious low-profile CEO, a woman who was said to value integrity above all else. Lena had witnessed the entire horrifying exchange at the aisle. She had been standing not 10 feet away, holding a tray of champagne flutes. She had heard every venomous word that had dripped from the bride's mouth. She had seen the way Ashley had looked at the planner, as if she were something she had scraped off the bottom of her shoe. It had made Lena's stomach turn. She had seen that kind of arrogance before, from wealthy guests who believed that paying for a service gave them the right to treat the staff like furniture. But this was different. This was a bride, on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, choosing to be needlessly cruel. Lena looked at the planner, who was now standing near the back wall, her posture poised and dignified despite the public humiliation she had just endured. Lena felt a powerful surge of empathy and anger on the woman's behalf. She knew the unofficial rule among service staff. Stay invisible, don't make waves, the customer is always right. Complaining about a guest, especially the bride, at a six-figure wedding was a surefire way to get fired. But Lena's conscience wouldn't let her stay silent. Her ethics professor had said, "The standard you walk past is the standard you accept." She couldn't just walk past this. She made a decision. Waiting for a moment when the guests were distracted by the exchange of vows, Lena discreetly made her way to the back of the room. She approached Marion, her heart thumping in her chest. "Excuse me, ma'am," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marion turned, her eyes meeting Lena's. She saw the anger and compassion in the young woman's expression. "Yes?" Marion replied, her voice soft and encouraging. "My name is Lena." "I'm one of the waitstaff," Lena began, her words coming out in a rush. "I saw what the bride did to you." What she said. It was horrible. It was unacceptable. And I just wanted to say, I'm so sorry that happened. No one deserves to be treated like that. Marion's expression softened. She offered Lena a small, genuine smile. "Thank you, Lena. That's very kind of you." "It's not just kind, it's the truth," Lena pressed on, feeling emboldened. "I'm willing to be a witness. If you want to report her to management, I'll back you up. I'll tell them exactly what I heard. You shouldn't have to put up with that." In that moment, Marion saw in Lena everything that was absent in Ashley. She saw integrity, courage, and a fundamental sense of decency. This young woman, who had nothing to gain and potentially her job to lose, was offering to stand up for a stranger she perceived as a fellow service worker. It was a pure and selfless act of solidarity. Marion was deeply moved. She placed a gentle hand on Lena's arm. "I appreciate that more than you know," she said, her voice warm. "But for now, I don't think reporting it will be necessary. Trust me, the situation is being handled." Lena looked confused, but there was a certainty in the planner's voice that was strangely reassuring. It was as if this woman had a plan, a quiet confidence that belied her station. Just keep doing your excellent work, Marion added. Your kindness has not gone unnoticed. With a final grateful smile, Marion turned her attention back to the ceremony. Lena returned to her duties, her mind buzzing. There was something more to that planner than met the eye. She had a strength and a serenity that was almost regal. Lena had no idea how right she was, or how her simple act of kindness had just put her on the radar of one of the most powerful women in the industry. She had made a choice, siding with dignity over arrogance, and that choice was about to change her life forever. While the ceremony continued under a cloud of unspoken tension, Ashley was basking in what she believed was the glow of her triumph. As soon as the vows were exchanged and she and Daniel were officially pronounced husband and wife, she pulled her giggling bridesmaids into a private alcove just off the main hall. The champagne was already flowing, and Ashley, high on her own perceived victory, was eager to recount her glorious moment. "Did you see her face?" Ashley said, her voice giddy and cruel. She mimicked Marion's calm expression with an exaggerated, mocking pout. She just stood there like a deer in the headlights. I really had to put that planner in her place. One of her bridesmaids, a nervous young woman named Tiffany, giggled weakly. "Oh, Ashley, you were so brutal. I can't believe you called her a maid right in front of everyone." Ashley preened, taking the comment as a compliment. Well, what else was I supposed to do? She was ruining the entire aesthetic. My wedding photos are going to last forever. I can't have some frumpy woman in a cheap suit photobombing the most important moment of my life. She took a large gulp of champagne, her eyes sparkling with malice. Honestly, it felt good. Someone had to remind her of her station. These people get paid to be invisible, not to stand around like they're one of the guests. Another bridesmaid, Chloe, who seemed slightly more uncomfortable with the conversation, chimed in. "But what if she complains to the hotel management? You could get her fired." Ashley let out a dismissive scoff, waving her hand as if shooing away a fly. "Fired? Please, she should be thanking me. I just taught her a valuable lesson about her job. Besides, who are they going to believe? Me? The bride who just paid this resort a fortune, or some random cleaning lady?" The term cleaning lady was thrown out with such casual cruelty that even Tiffany flinched. Ashley didn't notice. She was lost in her own narrative, casting herself as the hero who had defended the sanctity of her perfect wedding from the intrusion of the lower class. "And Daniel's mother," Ashley went on, her tone shifting to one of mild annoyance. "She's just as bad. Always so drab. I'm glad she knows to keep her distance. Can you imagine if she had tried to get involved in the planning? It would have been a disaster of beige and polyester." The bridesmaids exchanged uneasy glances. Mocking the staff was one thing, but mocking their new mother-in-law seemed like a dangerous game. But no one dared to challenge Ashley. Her personality was a tidal wave, and they were all just carried along in its wake, too afraid to be dashed against the rocks of her disapproval. Ashley was convinced she had won. She had married Daniel, securing what she believed was a comfortable upper-middle-class future. She had put the help in their place, reinforcing her own sense of superiority. In her mind, the world was unfolding exactly as it should. She was the star of the show, and everyone else was just a supporting character, or in Marion's case, a piece of scenery to be moved at will. She had no idea that her boastful, cruel words were not spoken in a vacuum. She didn't know that the very walls she was celebrating within belonged to the woman she was mocking. She was laughing and drinking in the heart of her enemy's territory, completely oblivious to the fact that her victory was a hollow illusion, a prelude to a fall so swift and so public that no one would ever forget it. Her arrogance had become a blinding light, and she was walking straight towards the edge of a cliff. Daniel managed to get through the rest of the ceremony on autopilot. He said the words, he put the ring on Ashley's finger. He even managed to smile for the cameras. But inside, he was a roiling sea of doubt and anger. The joy he was supposed to feel had been replaced by a cold, heavy dread. Every time he looked at Ashley, he no longer saw the woman he loved. He saw the sneer. He heard the insult. He felt the casual cruelty that had been aimed at his mother. The image was burned into his mind. As they walked back down the aisle, showered with rice and applause, he felt like a fraud. The congratulations from the guests felt hollow, their smiles tinged with the pity he had seen in their eyes earlier. They knew. They had all seen it. How could he pretend that this was the happiest day of his life when it had begun with such an act of profound disrespect? He needed a moment alone, a moment to think. Using the excuse of needing some fresh air, he slipped away from the receiving line and found a quiet balcony overlooking the ocean. He leaned against the railing, the sea breeze doing little to cool the fire in his gut. His mind was racing, replaying not just the incident at the aisle, but countless other small moments from his relationship with Ashley. He remembered the time she had snapped at a barista for getting her complicated coffee order slightly wrong. He remembered her complaining about the smell of the subway and her refusal to visit the community center where he volunteered because it was in a bad neighborhood. At the time, he had dismissed these things as quirks, as the minor flaws that everyone has. He had told himself she was just stressed or having a bad day. Now, he saw them for what they were. Not isolated incidents, but pieces of a pattern, a consistent and ugly worldview. How had he not seen it before? Was he so blinded by her beauty and charm that he had ignored the glaring red flags? The thought made him feel sick with self-reproach. Just then, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Ashley, followed by her giggling bridesmaids. He had inadvertently walked into the very alcove where she was holding court. He stayed in the shadows of the balcony, unseen, and the wind carried their voices to him. He heard Ashley's giddy, boastful tone as she recounted her confrontation with the planner. He heard her call his mother a cleaning lady. He heard her mocking Marion's simple clothes and her quiet nature. And then, the final blow. I'm glad she knows to keep her distance. Can you imagine if she had tried to get involved? It would have been a disaster of beige and polyester. A wave of nausea rolled over him. It wasn't just a public outburst anymore. This was who she was, through and through. This was what she truly believed. In her mind, his mother, the most brilliant, kind, and powerful woman he had ever known, was nothing more than a frumpy, tasteless annoyance. The love he had felt for Ashley, which had already been fractured, now shattered completely. It was replaced by a profound sense of betrayal and a deep, protective loyalty to his mother. He felt an overwhelming urge to step out from the shadows and confront her right there, to end the marriage before it had even truly begun. But then he remembered his mother's look, the look that had said, "Not yet. Be patient." He trusted her. He knew she had a reason for her calm, a strategy behind her silence. His role was not to explode with rage and cause a scene. His role was to be steady, to trust his mother's plan, and to be ready to stand by her side when the time came. He took a deep, steadying breath, the salt from the sea air filling his lungs. He would not ruin the ceremony, not in the way Ashley expected. He would not give her the satisfaction of a shouting match. He would let her believe she had won. He would let her arrogance continue to swell. He would play his part as the happy groom for now. But his doubts had solidified into a cold, hard certainty. He knew what he had to do. The tension inside him was no longer a chaotic storm of confusion. It was now a focused, calm resolve. The wedding reception would not be a celebration. It would be a reckoning. And he would be standing right next to his mother when it happened. Marion watched her son from across the lawn. She saw the turmoil in his eyes, the clenched jaw, the way he excused himself from the crowd. She knew he was hurting, that he was caught in an impossible position between the woman he thought he loved and the mother he had always respected. Her heart ached for him, but she also felt a fierce pride. She knew Daniel's character. She knew that his fundamental decency would not allow him to let this stand. She just needed him to hold on a little longer. She needed all the pieces to be in place. While the guests were being ushered toward the cocktail hour on the terrace, Marion found a secluded office used by the resort's management. It was her office, though no one here knew it. She closed the door, the sounds of the party fading into a distant murmur. The room was quiet, peaceful. For the first time all day, she allowed the mask of the humble planner to slip. Her posture straightened, her expression sharpened. She was no longer a service worker. She was a commander surveying the battlefield. She picked up the phone on the desk and dialed a number from memory. It was answered on the first ring. "Mr. Harrison, please," she said, her voice low and firm. There was a brief pause, and then a man's voice, crisp and professional, came on the line. "This is Harrison." David Harrison was the head of her executive board and her most trusted advisor for over 2 decades. He was one of the few people who knew about her plan to attend the wedding incognito. "David, it's Marion," she said. "How is it going?" Harrison asked, a note of concern in his voice. "The test is complete," Marion replied, her tone devoid of emotion. "The results are conclusive." "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, and she knew he meant it. "What do you need?" This was why she trusted him. He didn't ask for gossip or details. He asked how he could help. He was loyal and efficient. "It's time," Marion said, her voice now carrying the unmistakable weight of command. "Bring the board here, to the Serenity Shores reception hall. And David," she added, "contact legal. Have them join us. I also want the regional manager and the resort's head of HR to be present. Inform them it's a priority 1 meeting." "All of them?" "Marion, it's a Saturday evening," Harrison pointed out, though his tone was not questioning, merely stating a fact. "I am aware of the day, David," she said calmly. "Tell them it concerns a material breach of the Carter Enterprises Code of Conduct at the highest level, and that their presence is not optional. I want them here in 90 minutes. "Consider it done," Harrison said without another moment's hesitation. "We're on our way." The line clicked. Marion placed the receiver back in its cradle. A quiet stillness fell over the office. She stood there for a moment, her eyes closed, gathering her strength. She felt no anger, no desire for petty revenge. All she felt was a deep, resolute sense of purpose. She was not doing this to punish Ashley. She was doing this to protect her son, to uphold the values of her company, and to restore a small piece of justice to the world. A world where a waitress could be brave, and a bride could be cruel. The trap was now in motion. The gears were turning. The most powerful people in her organization were mobilizing, descending upon this picture-perfect wedding like a silent, unstoppable force. The guests were enjoying cocktails and canapés, oblivious to the corporate storm that was about to break. Ashley was laughing with her friends, convinced she was the queen of her own perfect day. But the real power was not in the bride's white dress or the expensive champagne. It was in a quiet office, in the form of a woman in a simple suit who had just made a single devastating phone call. An hour later, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, a subtle shift occurred. A senior member of the resort staff, a man with a calm and authoritative presence, began moving among the guests. He approached each small group with a polite smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he would say, his voice calm and professional. "On behalf of Carter Enterprises, we thank you for celebrating with us today. Before we proceed to dinner and the reception, there will be a brief but important announcement in the main reception hall. We kindly request your presence in 5 minutes." The announcement was met with a ripple of confusion. A corporate announcement? At a wedding? It was unusual, but the staff member's professional demeanor left little room for argument. The guests, intrigued and slightly bewildered, began to make their way from the terrace back into the grand ballroom. Ashley, who was in the middle of telling a long and self-aggrandizing story to her relatives, rolled her eyes in theatrical annoyance. "An announcement? Now?" she complained to Daniel, who had rejoined her side, his face an unreadable mask. "How boring! They're probably going to try and sell us all timeshares. Can't they see we're in the middle of a wedding?" "I'm sure it won't take long," Daniel said, his voice flat. He knew. He didn't know the details, but he knew this was his mother's doing. The reckoning was about to begin, Ashley sighed dramatically. Fine. But if it's some boring corporate speech, I'm heading straight for the champagne. She linked her arm through Daniel's, pulling him toward the ballroom. She was still completely oblivious, wrapped in the impenetrable cloak of her own self-importance. She saw the interruption as a minor inconvenience, a brief pause in the celebration of her. The stage was being set for a drama she couldn't even conceive of. The guests filed into the reception hall, which had been transformed for the dinner service. Elegant tables were set with fine china and towering floral centerpieces. At the front of the room, a small lectern had been placed on a low stage where the band was supposed to be setting up. The atmosphere was one of quiet curiosity. The wedding guests mingled with one another, whispering speculations about what was happening. Was there a problem with the venue? Was it a special surprise for the bride and groom? The band members stood off to the side, looking just as confused as everyone else. Ashley found her seat at the head table, tapping her manicured fingers impatiently on the pristine tablecloth. She was annoyed that the focus of the evening had been diverted from her, even for a moment. She looked around the room, expecting to see the planner scurrying about, looking stressed. But Marion was nowhere to be seen. Ashley felt a small, petty spike of satisfaction. Perhaps the woman had been so embarrassed by their earlier encounter that she had gone home in shame. The thought brought a smirk to her face. She had put the help in her place, and now the help had disappeared. Perfect. The doors at the back of the hall opened, but it wasn't a staff member who entered. It was a group of about a dozen men and women, all dressed in sharp, expensive business suits. They moved with an air of quiet, serious authority, their faces stern and focused. They looked completely out of place at a wedding reception. They walked to the side of the room and stood in a formidable line, their presence immediately silencing the remaining chatter in the room. Who were these people? They looked like they belonged in a boardroom, not a ballroom. The guests exchanged nervous glances. The air, which had been light with celebration, was now thick with a heavy, anxious tension. The stage was set, the audience was assembled, the jury was in place. All that was missing was the judge. The side door near the stage opened, and a figure emerged. The room, already quiet, fell into a profound pin-drop silence. Every eye in the hall turned to the woman who was now walking purposefully toward the lectern. It was the planner. But it was not the planner. The simple dark pantsuit was gone. In its place was a sleek, impeccably tailored power suit of a deep charcoal gray. Her hair was no longer in a simple bun. It was styled elegantly. She wore a single magnificent pearl necklace. The discreet earpiece was gone. She walked not with the hurried shuffle of a service worker, but with the measured, confident stride of someone who owned every room she entered. Her entire demeanor had transformed. The humble, invisible woman from the ceremony had vanished. In her place stood a figure of immense power and authority. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Guests who had pitied her earlier now stared in stunned disbelief. They knew in that instant that they had profoundly misjudged the situation. This was not a maid. This was not a planner. This was someone important. Ashley, seated at the head table, stared, her mouth slightly agape. Her annoyance had turned to confusion, and a tiny cold seed of unease began to sprout in her stomach. What was happening? Why was the cleaning lady dressed like that? Why was she walking up to the stage as if she belonged there? Marion reached the lectern and placed her hands on either side of it. She took a moment, her calm, intelligent eyes scanning the room. She looked at the guests, at the line of stone-faced executives, at her son, and finally her gaze rested on Ashley. Ashley squirmed under the intensity of that look. The smirk was gone from her face, replaced by a growing sense of dread. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy blanket of anticipation. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the woman on stage to speak. Daniel watched, his heart pounding not with anxiety, but with a fierce, soaring pride. This was his mother. This was the woman who had built an empire with her bare hands, who had faced down corporate raiders and hostile boards, all with this same unshakable calm. Ashley had mistaken her quietness for weakness. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The group of serious-looking men and women who had entered earlier now stood like a silent phalanx of soldiers, their eyes fixed on Marion. Among them was the resort manager and the head of human resources, their faces pale and anxious. They had been summoned without explanation, and seeing Marion Carter herself on that stage at her own son's wedding had sent a jolt of pure terror through them. They knew this was not a celebration. It was in tribunal. Lena, the waitress, stood near the back wall with the rest of the staff, a tray forgotten in her hands. Her eyes were wide with awe and dawning comprehension. She remembered the planner's words. The situation is being handled. She was beginning to understand that this woman handled things on a level she couldn't have possibly imagined. The gathering was complete. Every player was in their place. The wedding guests, the corporate board, the resort staff, the groom, and the bride. All of them were now an audience for a performance that had been scripted by a secret a long time ago. A drama of character and consequences that was about to reach its stunning, unforgettable climax. The world that Ashley had so carefully constructed, a world built on superficial judgments and a sense of entitlement, was about to be dismantled, piece by piece, in front of everyone she knew. Marion tapped the microphone once, a soft sound that echoed through the silent hall. She didn't need to ask for attention. She already had every ounce of it. Her voice when she spoke was not loud, but it was clear, calm, and carried an undeniable weight of authority that reached every corner of the room. "Good evening, everyone," she began. "My name is Marion Carter. I apologize for this interruption to the celebration, but a situation has occurred today that requires immediate and public address." A murmur went through the crowd. Carter? As in Carter Enterprises? The name of the resort? People began connecting the dots, their eyes widening in realization. At the head table, Ashley's face was beginning to lose its color. A cold sweat prickled on her forehead. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a coincidence, a bizarre joke. Marion's gaze swept across the room and landed on the formidable line of executives. For those of you who may not know, I am the founder and CEO of Carter Enterprises, the parent company that owns and operates this resort and over 200 other luxury properties worldwide. The murmurs exploded into audible gasps. The air crackled with astonishment. The planner, the woman who had been mocked and dismissed, was the owner of everything. She was a millionaire, a corporate titan. The revelation was a seismic shock, rearranging the reality of everyone in the room. Ashley felt the floor drop out from beneath her. Her vision swam. The blood drained from her face, leaving her with a pale, ghostly complexion. She looked at the woman on stage and then at Daniel, a desperate, pleading look in her eyes. Daniel didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on his mother, his expression one of solemn confirmation. The truth was out. The secret was revealed. But Marion was not finished. She let the weight of her first statement settle, allowing the shock to ripple through the audience. Then she delivered the second, more personal blow. "I am also," she said, her voice softening slightly but losing none of its power, "the groom's mother." A collective, audible gasp, louder and more shocked than the first, echoed through the hall. Jaws literally dropped. People turned to stare openly at Ashley, then at Daniel, then back at the woman on stage. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The humiliation at the aisle, the bride's cruelty, the groom's silent anger. It all made sense now. The woman Ashley had called a maid and a cleaning lady was not just her boss. She was her new mother-in-law. Ashley's world, which had been teetering on the edge, now shattered into a million pieces. A choked, strangled sound escaped her throat. She looked at Daniel, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. "Daniel?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Is this true?" Daniel finally turned to look at her. The mask was gone. His face was cold, his eyes filled with a disappointment so profound it was like a physical blow. He stood up, his voice clear and steady, ringing out in the silent room for all to hear. "Yes, Ashley," he said. "She's my mother." The confirmation was the final nail in the coffin. The whispers in the room grew louder, turning into a buzz of judgment and condemnation. The guests were not just witnesses anymore. They were a jury, and they had just heard the final damning piece of evidence. The bride hadn't just been rude to a planner. She had cruelly and publicly humiliated the mother of the man she had just married, a woman of immense power and stature, without even knowing it. It was a catastrophic self-inflicted wound born of pure, unadulterated arrogance. And now she was about to bleed out in front of everyone. The aftermath of the revelation was a storm of raw, unfiltered emotion. Ashley, her face as white as her dress, stumbled to her feet. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect poised bride had crumbled, revealing the panicked, desperate person underneath. "Marion, Mrs. Carter, I didn't know," she stammered, her voice a high-pitched, pleading whine. She tried to force a laugh, a shaky, unconvincing sound that died in her throat. "This is a joke, right? A test? Oh, you got me. You really got me." She looked around the room, searching for a friendly face, for anyone who would join in on the supposed joke. But all she saw were cold, judgmental stares. The executives looked at her with contempt. The guests looked at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. Her own bridesmaids wouldn't meet her eyes. Marion remained at the lectern, her expression unyielding. She was not angry. She was simply a force of nature, a consequence that Ashley had brought upon herself. "A joke," Marion repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "You think my identity is a joke?" "No, Miss Monroe. The only joke here is your character, or rather the complete lack of it." Ashley flinched as if she had been slapped. "No, please, you don't understand," she begged, tears now streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "I was just stressed. It's the wedding jitters. I would never, ever have spoken to you that way if I had known who you were." And with that one sentence, she sealed her own fate. Marion's eyes narrowed. "If you had known who I was," she repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. "So the cruelty was reserved for the person you thought was a powerless planner? The disrespect was for the woman you believed was just the help? You have just admitted that your kindness is not a virtue. It is a strategy. You are polite only to those who you think can benefit you. That is not character, Ms. Monroe. That is calculation." The truth of Marion's words was undeniable, a sharp, piercing light that exposed every dark corner of Ashley's personality. There was no defense. There was no excuse. In her desperation to save herself, Ashley had revealed the very rotten core that Marion had set out to find. At that moment, Daniel stepped forward, moving to stand beside his mother. He looked at Ashley, not with the rage he had felt earlier, but with a cold, clear finality. The love was gone, replaced by a profound and irreversible disappointment. "It's over, Ashley," he said, his voice ringing with a sad certainty. The guests gasped. This was it, the moment the entire room had been waiting for. "What?" Ashley whispered, her face crumpling in disbelief. "Daniel, no. We just got married. You can't." "Married?" Daniel let out a short, bitter laugh. "This wasn't a marriage. It was a transaction for you, a merger, and you failed the character clause." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the simple gold wedding band she had placed on his finger less than an hour ago. He held it up for a moment, then placed it deliberately on the lectern in front of his mother. "I am my mother's son," he said, his voice resonating with pride. "I was raised to believe that wealth and status mean nothing without kindness and respect. You have shown today that you possess neither." He then turned to face the stunned guests. "I apologize to all of you for bringing you here under false pretenses. This was not the celebration of a union. It was the end of one. The wedding is off. The declaration was absolute. The words hung in the air, irrevocable. Ashley's world, which had been collapsing in slow motion, now imploded completely. A strangled sob escaped her lips and she sank into her chair, her body trembling, her face buried in her hands. The room was silent for a moment, and then from the back, a single person began to clap. It was followed by another, and then another, until a wave of quiet, supportive applause filled the hall. They were not clapping for the drama. They were clapping for the justice. They were clapping for a son who chose his mother's dignity over a loveless marriage. They were clapping for a truth that had been powerfully and publicly revealed. The quiet applause faded, but the atmosphere in the room remained charged with an electric intensity. Ashley was still sobbing at the head table, a broken figure in a sea of judgment. But Marion's work was not yet done. The personal consequences had been delivered. Now it was time for the professional ones. She adjusted the microphone, her gaze shifting from Ashley to the resort's management, who were standing with the board members, looking as if they were awaiting a death sentence. "Let me be clear," Marion announced, her CEO voice now in full command. "The values of Carter Enterprises are not just words in a mission statement. They are the foundation of this company. We have a zero-tolerance policy for disrespect, whether it comes from our staff or from our guests. Dignity is not a privilege reserved for the wealthy. It is a right for every single person who walks through our doors." Her eyes found Ashley again. "Therefore, effective immediately, miss. Ashley Monroe is permanently banned from this resort and from every Carter-owned property worldwide. Her name will be flagged in our global system. Should she attempt to book a room, reserve a table, or attend an event at any of our establishments, she will be politely but firmly asked to leave." The punishment was swift, corporate, and devastatingly public. It wasn't just about this one wedding. It was a complete and total excommunication from a world of luxury and status that Ashley had so desperately wanted to be a part of. The whispers from the guests started again, this time with a sharp, gossipy edge. Ashley's face, already pale, turned a sickly shade of gray. She was being publicly blacklisted, branded as an undesirable by one of the most prestigious hospitality brands in the world. Her social life, built on appearances and connections, was being dismantled before her very eyes. But Marion was not just there to deliver punishment. She was also there to reward virtue. Her gaze scanned the back of the room, past the stunned guests, to the assembled staff. "However," she continued, her voice warming slightly, "today also showed me an example of the kind of integrity we strive to cultivate in our employees." She paused, searching the crowd of uniforms until her eyes landed on one person. "Lena Brooks, would you please come forward?" Lena froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Every head in the room turned to look at her. She stood paralyzed, a deer in the headlights, until a colleague gave her a gentle nudge. Numbly, she began to walk toward the stage, her legs feeling like they were made of lead. The entire room watched her slow, nervous procession. She felt 1,000 eyes on her as she approached the lectern, where the most powerful woman she had ever met was waiting. When she finally reached the stage, Marion gave her a warm, reassuring smile. She turned back to the microphone. "Earlier today, when I was just a planner in a simple suit, when this young woman believed I had no power and no voice, she witnessed Ms. Monroe's behavior. She had nothing to gain, and potentially her job to lose, but she came to me and offered her support. She offered to be a witness. She stood up for a stranger because she believed it was the right thing to do." Marion looked directly at Lena, her eyes filled with genuine admiration. "That, ladies and gentlemen, is character. That is the spirit of Carter Enterprises." She then turned back to the audience, her voice ringing with purpose. "Therefore, I am promoting Miss Brooks, effective immediately, to a new position on my corporate hospitality training team, where she will help us develop our curriculum on guest relations and employee dignity. Furthermore, Carter Enterprises will be granting her a full 4-year scholarship to complete her university degree, with a guaranteed management position upon graduation." The room erupted in spontaneous, wholehearted applause. This time it was loud and joyous. Lena stood on the stage, her mind reeling, tears of shock and gratitude welling in her eyes. A few hours ago, she had been a part-time waitress worried about making tuition. Now, her life had been completely transformed. She had made a simple choice, an act of kindness with no expectation of reward, and it had changed her destiny. The contrast was stunning and deliberate. In one single powerful stroke, Marion had demonstrated the two paths: the path of arrogance, which led to public humiliation and exile, and the path of integrity, which led to opportunity and reward. The lesson was crystal clear, delivered not as a lecture, but as a real-time demonstration of cause and effect. The evening ended not with a wedding reception, but with a quiet, dignified dispersal. The board members, having witnessed their CEO's decisive action, left with a renewed sense of respect for the woman they worked for. The resort staff, buzzing with the news of Lena's promotion, felt a surge of pride and loyalty. They worked for a company where character mattered. The guests, having seen a drama more compelling than any movie, left with a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. In the center of the now emptying ballroom, only one person from the bridal party remained. Ashley's bridesmaids had melted away, eager to distance themselves from her social implosion. Her family members, after a few whispered, embarrassed words, had made their excuses and left. Now, she was completely and utterly alone. Her perfect white dress seemed like a costume for a play that had ended in disaster. Finally, with a convulsive sob, she pushed herself up from the table and stumbled toward the exit. She didn't run. It was a walk of shame. Her head bowed, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She didn't look at anyone, but she could feel the weight of their stares, the silent judgment that followed her every step. The woman who had entered the room as a triumphant bride left it as a pariah. As the doors swung shut behind her, a sense of calm finally settled over the room. Daniel walked over to his mother, his face etched with a mixture of relief, sadness, and profound gratitude. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her in a tight embrace. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry I brought her into our lives. I was blind." Marion hugged him back, patting his back gently. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Daniel," she said, her voice soft and maternal once again. "You fell in love with a beautiful illusion. Today, your eyes were opened. That is a painful gift, but it is a gift nonetheless." He pulled back, looking at her with awe. "You knew, didn't you? You suspected what she was like all along." Marion smiled, a sad, wise smile. "I had my suspicions," she admitted, "but I needed to be sure. More importantly, you needed to see it for yourself." The remaining guests, who had lingered to offer their support, watched the tender moment between mother and son. They applauded once more, a soft and respectful ovation for a family that had faced a public crisis with an incredible display of strength and integrity. The contrast between the two scenes, Ashley's solitary, humiliating exit and the warm, loving embrace of Marion and Daniel, was the final, unspoken moral of the story. Arrogance had led to isolation. Dignity had reinforced connection. The spectacle was over. The lavish decorations and expensive flowers now seemed like a hollow backdrop to the very real human drama that had unfolded. The wedding had been a failure, but in its ashes, something important had been forged. Truth had been honored, character had been rewarded, and a son's love and respect for his mother had been affirmed in the most powerful way imaginable. True character isn't shown in the wealth you display or the beauty you possess. It is revealed in the quiet moments, in how we treat those we think can do nothing for us. It is etched not in grand gestures, but in small acts of kindness or cruelty. Ashley believed her status placed her above the simple rules of decency. She thought the planner was insignificant, a powerless pawn in the grand game of her perfect wedding. But she was wrong. The person she tried to humiliate was the person who held all the power. The person she dismissed as the help was the one who would ultimately help her to the door. In the end, arrogance is a prison of one's own making. It builds walls that keep out love, loyalty, and true connection. It blinds you to the worth of others, and in doing so, it diminishes your own. Dignity and humility, on the other hand, are keys. They unlock doors, they build bridges, they create respect that cannot be bought and loyalty that cannot be commanded. Ashley's world crumbled because it was built on a foundation of sand, on appearances, status, and a sense of entitlement. Marion's world, built on the solid rock of integrity, hard work, and respect for all people, only grew stronger. She did not stoop to Ashley's level. She did not resort to insults or rage. She simply, calmly, and methodically revealed the truth. And the truth was consequence enough. Fato out on Marion, her arm linked through her son's, a quiet, knowing smile on her face. They walked out of the ballroom, not as a family fractured by a crisis, but as one fortified by it, ready to face the future with the unshakable knowledge that true worth is not something you wear or own, but something you are. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.